On this Wednesday night, Canada takes aim at Iran's elite military force. Why Iran's Revolutionary Guard has been declared a terrorist entity.
Our government will ensure that there is no immunity for Iran's unlawful actions.
Plus a message for Canadians living in Iran.
It's time to come back home.
Stifling heat, the scramble to keep cool as scorching and deadly temperatures affect millions in the U.S., the Middle East, and here at home. Turbulence at WestJet, canceled flights, and a looming strike. Are your summer travel plans in jeopardy? And remembering a supreme talent of baseball. Tributes to Willie Mays, whose power, speed, and skill dominated the game in every way.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After years of pressure, the Canadian government has designated Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organization. The IRGC, a major military, political, and economic force in Iran, has close ties to the supreme leader and is notorious for human rights abuses. It was the group that shot down a Ukrainian airliner minutes after takeoff in Tehran in 2020, killing all 176 people on board. 85 of those people had ties to Canada, and their families, along with Iran's diaspora community, have demanded Canada act. Touria Izri has our top story tonight.
PS 752 was shot down minutes after takeoff. But it's taken years of pressure for Canada to list the group responsible a terrorist organization.
This action sends a strong message that Canada will use all of the tools at its disposal to combat the terrorist entity of the IRGC.
Ottawa is now warning of retaliation and arbitrary arrests.
For those who are in Iran right now, it's time to come back home.
The designation means members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are banned from Canada. If they enter, they face prosecution and their bank accounts will be frozen.
It's widely believed that IRGC officials have a lot of assets in Canada. So I think this gives our public security officials probably an extra avenue, an extra legal method.
Global News reported last March, Canada ordered the deportation of a senior Iranian official. The regime is also accused of hiring 2 Canadians with ties to Hells Angels as hitmen. And Tehran has yet to face justice for downing flight PS 752. Shaheen Moghadam's wife and son were on board.
These atrocity needs justice. We need it, and all Canadian has to believe that Canadian life is matter to their own government.
Since 2018, the Conservatives have pushed for the IRGC to be listed a terrorist organization.
Here are motion calls on the government.
Those calls have only grown louder in the face of a brutal crackdown against protesters. And since Hamas, backed by the Iranian regime, launched the October 7th attack on Israel, Pierre Poilievre criticized the Prime Minister for the timing of the announcement, saying it was motivated by politics.
It took a by-election for the Prime Minister to change his mind.
There can be no impunity for Iran's disregard of human rights and its support of terrorism.
The U.S. labeled the IRGC a terrorist organization in 2019. Several European countries have urged the EU to do the same, but so far it has not. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
Extreme heat is causing an alarming number of deaths in Saudi Arabia. There are reports hundreds of people have died there while taking part in one of the world's largest religious gatherings, the Hajj in Mecca. At one point, temperatures reached almost 52 degrees Celsius. French media is reporting the number of deaths at the Hajj has surged past 900. Saudi Arabia is not commenting on the death toll, but it has tried to put in measures to keep people cool. More than 1.8 million Muslims took part in the multi-day pilgrimage in what is Islam's holiest city. And in the U.S., tens of millions of Americans are still sweltering under a heat dome. A number of temperature records have been broken this week across the U.S. More are expected to fall. Some cities in Maine reached all-time highs today. Close to 75 million Americans are under heat advisories. 5 million live in areas facing dangerously high temperatures. And the risky conditions are expected to hover across the region through the weekend. It doesn't stop at the border, of course. The heat dome extends into Canada, where millions are under heat warnings. Temperatures are in the mid-30s, but because of the high humidity, it feels more like 40 degrees in some areas. Those with somewhere cool to go or who have air conditioning are weathering this intense heat, but not everyone has those options. Heidi Petracek reports on what's being done to help the most vulnerable.
It's Halifax's first day under a heat warning that now covers much of the East Coast. The maximum high, 33 degrees, 38 with the humidex. Air conditioning at this seniors club offers respite for those without.
I hate the heat. I hate it so bad that if I could move to Antarctica, I would.
City schools don't have AC. The district says teachers are opening windows, closing blinds, and using fans.
I would say there's probably a lot of people without AC.
So it's important to watch for signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke, which can cause permanent disability or death if it's not treated.
When you do start to get symptoms like muscle cramps, feeling really tired, might be sweating a lot, might start to feel nauseous, that is when you really need to get somewhere cool.
People living in tents are trying to stay hydrated.
I'm probably going to be going up there again later, getting some more water.
We deliver water every week to people in designated locations, so we increased the water orders for this week.
In Toronto, volunteers unloaded hundreds of thousands of water bottles for people who don't have homes on day 3 of punishing temperatures there.
Can you imagine sitting outside on a day like today and not drinking anything?
It felt like 43 degrees in Montreal. These grade 4 students were taken out of hot classrooms to cool off here. A similar strategy at Halifax's city pool, which extended its hours for folks looking to cool off.
Now I'm back out in the heat, but I'm not going to go home because I don't have any way of cooling, except I do have one fan I haven't taken out of the box yet.
The setting of the scorching sun won't offer much relief, with nighttime lows barely dipping below 20. A break in the weather isn't in the forecast until the end of the week. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
It could be that summer travel plans for thousands of Canadians are in jeopardy. WestJet has canceled more than 30 flights ahead of a looming strike by its plane mechanics. And as Heather Yourex-West explains, every flight operated by Canada's second largest carrier could be grounded if a deal isn't reached soon.
WestJet's mechanics lined up in front of the company's Calgary headquarters Wednesday with a clear message. No engineers, no flights. And 671 aircraft maintenance engineers are ready to walk off the job.
It does impact all of the fleet, whether it's our regional carrier or our mainline carrier. Flights would not be certified airworthy.
Members voted overwhelmingly to reject a tentative agreement that had been struck with the airline last month. The union says it had hoped to reopen negotiations, but WestJet asked Ottawa to turn things over to Canada's Industrial Relations Board.
We've requested, indeed, the government and the CRB to do the arbitration and at the same time stop any labour action, both from our end, the lockout, as well as a work stoppage through a strike.
After the union posted its 72-hour strike notice on Monday, flight cancellations quickly followed. Mary Beth Gallant is trying to get from Calgary to Peterborough, Ontario.
Our flight was canceled to Toronto today, direct. So now we go to Vancouver, wait 4 hours, and then fly to Toronto and get in at 1 in the morning.
WestJet's mechanics are looking for their first ever collective agreement since joining the U.S.-based Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association. Canada's Industrial Relations Board will now decide whether to send both sides to arbitration, something the Labour Minister hopes will help broker a deal.
In the short term, there may be some flights disrupted, but I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail.
WestJet is now parking aircraft in anticipation of what could be a very disruptive strike. Dozens of flights have been canceled so far, and if a deal isn't reached by tomorrow, many more could follow. Donna?
All right, Heather Yourex-West in Calgary, thanks. The head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, is in Ottawa for a quick visit, his first in nearly 2 years. It's part of a tour of North American capitals ahead of the next NATO summit in July. Stoltenberg met the Prime Minister and received an award for his decade of service as Secretary General. As David Aiken explains, he used this trip to remind Canada of a key commitment to our allies.
Lester B. Pearson was a key architect of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, helping make Canada an indispensable partner at NATO's creation. But now, as the alliance marks 75 years in existence, Canada's critics, here and abroad, say it is moving to NATO's margins, because Canada is now the only one of NATO's 32 members without a plan to meet the NATO-wide commitment of spending 2% of GDP on defense. NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg acknowledged Canada has recently boosted defense spending, but
I continue to expect that all allies should meet the guideline of spending 2%. I know that this is not always easy.
Canada this year will only spend about 1.4% of GDP on defense.
We have more than doubled defense spending, from about $18 billion in 2014 up to about $41 billion this year. Next year, it's going up an additional 27%. We are on a very strong upward trajectory.
Stoltenberg's visit to Ottawa is part of his work ahead of next month's NATO Leaders Summit to be held in Washington. There, he expects NATO allies to take action to curb China's export of arms and technology to Russia.
The reality is that China is fueling the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. And at the same time, it wants to maintain good relations with the West. Well, Beijing cannot have it both ways.
Stoltenberg says NATO allies must force China to choose.
Allies need to impose a cost.
NATO leaders also expect to agree on new ways to support Ukraine, both financially and militarily. And NATO leaders will also consider defense and deterrence in the Arctic, leveraging the strengths of the newest members of the alliance, Finland and Sweden. And finally, NATO leaders are expected to confirm Stoltenberg's successor at the Washington summit. Canada and all but one NATO country have endorsed the Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, to become NATO's next Secretary General. Donna?
Okay, David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you. That meeting in North Korea between two leaders considered pariahs in much of the world has wrapped up. The president of Russia and North Korea's supreme leader signing a comprehensive deal to expand economic and military cooperation. Vladimir Putin says the agreement includes a promise of mutual aid if either country is attacked. He says it also covers trade, investment, and cultural ties. Both leaders are calling the deal a major boost to relations. It has triggered concerns of a possible arms arrangement to provide Russia badly needed munitions for its war on Ukraine in exchange for technological support to enhance North Korea's nuclear program. Putin's next stop is Vietnam. A UN report says Israeli defense forces may have repeatedly violated fundamental principles of the laws of war with their airstrikes on Gaza. The report looked into 6 attacks on residential buildings plus a school and refugee camps in the early weeks of the assault on Gaza. It concludes the requirement by international law to avoid or minimize civilian harm appears to have been systematically violated. The 6 strikes killed at least 218 people. The report also says Palestinian armed groups may be violating international law by firing indiscriminately into Israel. Israel rejects the findings, calling them factually, legally, and methodologically flawed. Canada's population tops 41 million coming up. How this country gained more than 1 million people in less than a year. A tragedy in Ontario is under investigation after a 6-year-old boy was struck and killed by a school bus. It happened this morning in Vaughan, a city about an hour north of Toronto. Police say the bus was picking up children for school when the boy was hit.
Everybody here is in shock. I can't really process it. I don't know. There's no words. I feel so sorry for the family.
I just wish that I can pass these yellow lines and hug this grandmom and the mom of the child. That's my feeling is.
This thing is very heartbroken, and for the kids that saw this thing happen this morning, because kids were in the bus, they all saw it. So this is very, very sad.
There are reports the boy may have been running to catch the bus when he was hit. Police say the bus driver remained at the scene and is cooperating with the investigation. Canada's population just keeps growing. Statistics Canada says the population topped 41 million people in the first quarter of 2024, growing by 0.6%. The country welcomed more than 121,000 new people from January to March. It was less than a year ago that the population hit the 40 million mark. The federal government's decision on open net salmon farms ahead, what it means for the lucrative industry in BC. After years of pressure, the federal government has delayed a decision on closing open net salmon farms off BC's coast. The Liberal government had promised to phase out the farms by next year, but it is a politically charged, contentious issue. And as Heather Yourex-West explains, today's decision is getting mixed reaction.
Some say it's a watershed moment for British Columbia's salmon industry as the federal government announces a phased ban on open net salmon aquaculture within 5 years.
I think it's a remarkable step forward for us.
The industry knew that changes were going to be made, and I think that all of us together, we will co-build sustainable fisheries for our population for the future.
The feds, fulfilling a 2019 campaign promise, say the move aims to protect wild salmon populations from threats like sea lice posed by the farms. Advocates pushing for a transition to more sustainable land-based operations say 5 years is too long.
A critical need for immediate safeguarding of wild salmon. 5 years, it is what it is. It's the longest term that these fish farms have been given, so it doesn't line up with the idea that this is about protecting wild salmon.
But some argue the ban jeopardizes thousands of jobs and billions in economic activity, attributing this move to activist pressure rather than scientific consensus.
And it's really important for us to look at all the stressors and impacts to wild salmon. To simply say that salmon aquaculture is the reason for wild salmon decline is irresponsible.
We have over 5,000 employees, including 500 Indigenous employees whose jobs are at risk right now, as well as the $1.2 billion that we contribute to the British Columbia economy.
Ottawa says a draft salmon aquaculture transition plan will be released by the end of July. It intends to transition to closed containment systems and issue longer-term licenses to encourage sustainable practices.
Presently, no other Western North American state allows open net pen salmon aquaculture, with the last other jurisdiction that did allow it, Washington State, banning it in 2022.
Stricter conditions on sea lice management and enhanced environmental monitoring will accompany renewed aquaculture licenses starting on July 1st. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Vancouver.
Next, the incredible all-round talent of baseball legend Willie Mays. One of baseball's most electrifying players has died. Willie Mays was remarkable because he didn't just excel at one aspect of the game, he was excellent at all of them. He was the first player with 300 home runs and 300 stolen bases. He was also beloved for his charisma and grace and became a symbol of perseverance for black athletes. Eric Sorensen looks at Mays' legendary contribution to the sport.
Mays gets his first hit of the series.
He was one of the towering figures in all of sports. Arguably the greatest all-round baseball player ever. Willie Mays hit 660 home runs and won 12 Gold Gloves. The catch, as it's called, is one of the iconic moments in the history of the game.
I always felt I could catch every ball that came out there. I believed that I could do anything on a ball field.
Mays started in the Negro Leagues, a professional even in high school. The New York Giants took a chance on him.
You'd have to be blind if you were a manager and couldn't tell that there was a superstar standing in front of you in Willie Mays.
He was a hero to black kids playing stickball in Harlem.
Say Willie.
There was a song and a nickname from saying to everyone he'd meet, say hey.
Say hey, say Willie, that jive kid is great.
But Mays' impact reached beyond baseball. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in the game. Mays was just as instrumental in changing attitudes. Barack Obama once said Robinson and Mays made it possible for him to become president. He was not a political activist, but his talent and popularity did help change America.
Both Martin Luther King and Barack Obama expressed the sentiment that without people like Willie Mays, who gained perhaps grudging acceptance from the larger white culture, that played a part. It might have been a more subtle part, but it played a part in the long march toward justice.
He was baseball.
His flair and joy for baseball was captured in an HBO documentary.
He dominated the entirety of the game.
He moved with the Giants when baseball expanded to the West Coast, but returned to New York to retire.
I love baseball, and I played it all the time, but the way that I loved it.
Barack Obama posted that Willie Mays was blessed with an unmatched combination of grace, skill, and power, an inspiration to an entire generation. A charismatic figure who transformed how African Americans were seen and treated in sports.
We have some sad news tonight about someone who wasn't famous, who didn't appear on camera, but without whom we wouldn't be what we are at Global National. Mark Blanchard was one of a kind, a technical, logistical wizard who solved problems and made things happen. When news broke, he got our crews in the field fast. He made sure they could file quickly, always a step ahead of everyone. Mark helped us cover some of the biggest news events in Canada and the world, from Haiti to Paris to London to Washington, D.C., from the side of a highway to state funerals. His passion for the job was infectious. He demanded excellence and was a master at overcoming obstacles. Those who worked with him were fiercely loyal and relied on him deeply. He was always there for us. Mark died at home in Halifax today of a heart attack. He was 55. He is survived by his wife Carrie, son Alex, and daughter Emma. Our deepest condolences to them. And from his work family, we just wish this last road trip hadn't come so soon. Happy trails, Mark. Rest easy.